More than 2 weeks after the fall of Bashar al-Assad, the tragic next step in the search of many Syrians for their loved ones, some of the first images emerging of what are believed to be mass graves that may have been used by the regime to bury some of those who were first taken to the detention centres and then tortured to death. One at Qutaifa, which is on the outskirts of Damascus, not very far from the Syrian capital, where one advocacy group has been speaking of the truckloads of bodies that were brought each week. What we understand is that 4 tractor trailers carrying 150 bodies each were brought twice a week between 2012 and 2018 to this particular site, now be the subject of a search for some of those bodies in the hope that some may be identified. Another site in the southern province of Daraa, also now believed to be another of those mass burial sites, as Syrians try and establish the identities of some of the 150,000 people who've disappeared, to try and figure out if any of them may lie in these sites. That's according to the International Commission on Missing Persons. Still, many relatives frantically searching for their loved ones in their hopes that they might be alive. But these are the clearest indication yet, the first tangible proof of what we'd long heard about from outside of Syria during the Assad regime, of the brutality of its secret services, the brutality of its detention centres, with many of those bodies now, no doubt, beyond recognition. It's unclear also for the time being how many people may have been buried there. Melissa Bell, CNN, Paris.
Oh, thanks to Melissa Bell. I'm joined now by Muaz Mustafa, the Executive Director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force from Istanbul. Welcome to our program. I understand you had a chance to visit some of these sites where the mass graves are said to be. Would you share with us how you first located the sites and what have you been able to find so far?
Sure, absolutely. So we were able to initially identify these mass grave locations back in 2021. It is when these workers that worked on the mass graves, whether it is the funeral office workers that pulled the bodies into the massive trenches, or the excavator and bulldozer drivers, some of which had escaped to Germany. Just like with the defector Caesar, these became very important witnesses and helped us identify where these mass grave sites were. We were able to see them on Google Earth years ago, and even go back in the timeline and see how the Earth is changing and see these long lines and these trucks showing up from satellite imagery. But just the other day, I was able to go there in person and look at these locations, which is, staggering in terms of size, and unbelievable that the world turned away for so long. Now that people have known where these mass graves are, I think it's really important for the world to do more to help us figure out the way forward.
How did you come up with the figure of hundreds of thousands of bodies? How can you be certain that there are that many victims? It's just hard to believe.
It is. It's hard to process, honestly. In so many things, going around Damascus, I just came out on my way back to Washington for urgent meetings on Syria before having to return to Damascus. But speaking independently with the excavator driver, the bulldozer driver, the funeral office municipality worker who was in charge of driving there with a team and pulling the bodies in, each of them in separate conversations mentioned the same things, that 4 tractor trailers would come to this specific Al-Qutaifa mass grave site twice a week, each of them having at the very least 100 bodies, most of the time 150 or more. They would come every week from 2012 until 2018. The number that I actually, in my conversation with Reuters was very conservative, saying 100,000 at the very, very least. But if you look at the numbers and you look at these witnesses that worked these mass graves, dug them, pulled the bodies in from these trucks that were coming in twice a week for, quite a few years, you can see that we're looking at 300,000 bodies or potentially more. And this isn't the only mass grave site. There are others as well. This happens to be, at least from our organization, what we've seen, the biggest one yet.
I want to go back to the point that you were making before about the bulldozer operators. And you said that the bulldozer excavator driver described how intelligence officers force workers to use the bulldozer to flatten and compress the bodies to make them fit and easier to bury before digging the next line or the next trench. What was your reaction when you heard that chilling and really macabre testimony for the first time.
Hard to keep back tears, you know, hard to not cry, but then continue to have like, we're having a meeting here and we're trying to figure out and ascertain how this happened. And this isn't the only bad story. Sometimes they would force, like they would want like, let's say a car comes by late after the big trailer trucks have been buried. One time a car came, an ice cream truck came with an entire family, including an infant. They were put on the side of the mass grave. The excavator driver wanted to dig a hole, but the intelligence officers, the security officers of the Assad regime said, no, leave them out for a while, and then we'll figure them out later. The next day when he came, there was a dog eating that infant. It is unbelievable stories of horror. And I think the world should move now. We need international experts. We need governments to go help the new Syrian government secure these places and then help us figure out, okay, well, then how do we go about preserving evidence, preserving the chain of evidence, having DNA tests, giving people closure that are still looking for loved ones that may be already buried in these horrific mass graves.
Yeah, this is about closure, about dignity, and you know better than I do that there are many families in Syria and others who have fled their country, who have loved ones who have gone missing over the years. Is there any hope you will be able to identify any of the bodies that are being found in the mass graves?
So right now, our job as an organization is not to mess with the mass graves, not to try to dig anything, take anything, do anything, because that's not our expertise. Our job is to raise awareness, especially to the local populations. Look, we need to secure this place, and then continue in coordination with the new Damascus government to call on the right experts, like people that worked in Srebrenica and others, to go in. And we're also calling, different organizations and stuff that would bring portable DNA testing, and then do it in a professional way that preserves the evidence, because accountability is important, and just as important, allows us to have a very controlled way of being able to identify these people based on their DNA and letting the many Syrians that are returning home and the ones that are there know what happened to their loved ones. They need closure. I mean, sometimes knowing that your loved one's dead is honestly better than just living on a 1% chance hope that he or she is and not seeing them ever again.
Muaz Mustafa in Istanbul, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you for having me.